Hello, everyone, and welcome back to All Around the World Leaders, a show from the Red Path Network where me, your host Dara, interviews various 40k players from all around the world about different aspects of the game. Today, I'm going to be talking to my good friend Rory about how to create custom lore for your warbands or companies in games of Warhammer. So grab yourselves a brew and let's dive into the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Red Path and All Around the World Eaters. I am your host, Dara, and I am joined today by my good friend Rory, and we are going to be talking all things custom and homebrew lore. Now, the show is normally about competitive innovations in the hobby, namely world eaters and things like that, but I thought it would be fun to kind of spice it up and bring a new topic in, one that's been very often requested of fans of the channel, talking about custom and homebrew lore. And I was thinking to myself, who better to bring on the show to talk about how to create lore than the person who has driven me to create more lore than anyone else, my good friend Rory. So Rory, why don't you say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here today. Obviously, my name is Rory. I love Blood Angels. They've been my main army for, I think, last 3 years, nearly four, and they've been the army I've put my most amount of love and time and interest into. Like Dara was saying, I'm a long-time friend of his. We met in our local store 6 years, 5 or 6 years ago
A
now.
long
I
time ago at this
think
point.
approaching 6 years now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been playing against Dara for years. My Blood Angels and his World Eaters have been bouncing off each other. They have a deep hatred for one another. And in those games, our lores and our headcanon is really developed through lovely in-game moments and stuff that we'll get into later on. But no, yeah, it's good to be here, man. Thank you. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
and you can find me on Instagram at KnightsofBaal, all one word.
Yeah, you wanna check out Rory's stuff on Instagram. It's really really cool, and it is fantastic that you were able to join me here today. But yeah, like you say, we've been playing against each other for a very long time, and over the course of those many years, what kind of started out as memes and jokes of fighting against each other actually kind of developed into, I would say, semi-serious headcanon would be probably the correct
Definitely.
term for
Yeah.
what it's become. But yeah, so obviously surprising to some, we don't have a World Leaders player on the show today, but I thought it's actually quite fun to pull different minds and personalities from the community for this show, which is a little bit different to what we normally do. So we are going to be kind of going through, I suppose, our own and Rory's perspectives on the creation of homebrew lore and the different angles you can kind of take on all that, and sort of the reasons why you might or might not do it, and what makes good homebrew lore, what makes it different from bad homebrew lore. And we might have a little surprise something at the end, a little example of what we've been talking about. But I think what we'll start with is saying, Rory, what inspired you, amongst everything? What was the biggest driving factor to make you kind of say, actually, you know what, I want to diverge from the set canon, the running the named characters that are laid down in the codex and stuff? What made you say, I want to make this a little bit more personal?
I think so. Again, like when you say personal, all my grandparents unfortunately have passed away. And then when I started painting Blood Angels during lockdown, I wanted to kind of I don't know, immortalize them. I can't think of the word. So I painted up a chapter ancient for my Blood Angels, and I named them Brother Violetto, but my granny's name was Violet. So just stuff. I've got my Death Company captain, who's called Lavrentios, but the my granddad was called Larry or Lawrence. So it's just kind of like things like that. That's where I started, was like to kind of immortalize people I looked a lot, like I looked up to and respected so much and loved, to like have them on the tabletop as like they'll always be with me kind of thing in my chapter. But that was only with naming characters. It was only when I listened to my first audiobook, which I think was Devastation of Ball, or maybe we listened to one together before that. Oh no, it was the Horus Heresy one. Fear to Tread, I think, was the first audiobook that you and I
That would have
listened
been
to.
actually, yeah, during lockdown.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and just I didn't. It was my first audiobook, in 30K and in Warhammer in general, and just hearing like about these like I don't know all these characters and the detail and just the way things were described and stuff. I was like, man, it'd be really fun to like do my own, have my own take on it and like make up my own stuff for it. So like heavily inspired obviously by the audiobooks, and like other pieces of Warhammer media and stuff like the what's it called, the Story Forge stuff for like Warhammer Plus and all that. Just like taking snippets, like inspiration and stuff, and like reading some other things online and stuff on the wiki and everything. But that's where it kind of started, and it's kind of just led into like a passion of mine. Like I really do enjoy writing it now. There'll be times where like I'll be doing it, like say on the bus out somewhere, like just doing nothing, and I'll think of something in my head and be like, oh, I should write that down. And I write a sentence or like two, and then those two sentences will turn into hundreds of words just because I keep adding to it. And like I'll think of something new or what to change, and I'll go back and I'll write it up again, and then I'll read it to Dara here before I put it as my Instagram captions on my posts. But no, yeah, like now me and Dara bounce off each other as well. We'd like sit down in the kitchen sometimes and just be like, "Oh, so I was kind of thinking of this direction I was going to take for the lore," and it's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, tell me more," and then adding to it and stuff. Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
good.
it's interesting how I feel like it's quite you've got quite two cool, I suppose, motivations for getting into doing homebrew lore. One of them is probably the more common one that a lot of people can associate with, the aspect of reading or consuming media in Warhammer and being inspired by it to create something yourself. Because like it is a really fun universe, but the universe is also big enough to be a sandbox and has the scope and room to create your own things, which is I think how a lot of people get into the homebrew. But then
Mm,
you have the obviously very personal side of it of wanting to immortalize people that you care about, by bringing that into the tabletop game as well, which I think is really really cool. And I think there's probably quite a few people who associate with that as well. And it is really interesting how it starts as one thing and it's like a proper domino effect. Then that like
yeah,
if you find someone that you bounce off of as well with a lore like the way that we have, where it's like we'll just sit down and like you say a single line or two or a single action
yeah.
in a game or something can really develop into a whole host of other things, right?
And yeah, absolutely. And it definitely helps as well that our two chapters already have like a deep hatred for each other anyway, and especially after oh what Echoes of Eternity? I can't remember the name of the
Yeah, Echoes
Siege
was
Terror
the
book.
siege
Just
book.
after
Yeah.
that, and I'm not gonna say anything out of fear that someone's planning on listening to that and don't spoil anything. But yeah, after listening to that and what's to come next, and it really helps when it's like already like deeply in, or it's like already like deeply set in the canon that
Mm-hmm.
these two chapters do not like each other,
Yeah.
and it just makes it that bit easier and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
So when it comes to you know when you sit down to write a piece of homebrew lore for the Knights of Baal, which is
Mm,
your it's not a chapter, right? It's a company within the Blood Angels.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when
Um,
you sit down to write something for the Knights of Baal, what's like the most important aspect that you're trying to convey there? Is it like a sense of originality, or like what's your goal when you sit down to write a new piece?
Mainly just to have fun and like just kind of bring my models to life. That's as long as I obviously I respect, I want other people's opinions and thoughts on it and stuff, but as long as I'm enjoying what I'm reading or writing even, and then when I reread it, I still get like that buzz from it. Because what I normally do is whenever I write stuff, it'll be after a game. So I'm trying to think of like the first ever piece of headcanon or lore I wrote for the Knights of Baal was against the game that Barney was christened in.
I was gonna say
Yeah,
you're gonna drop the Barney story.
absolutely. I'm name dropping Barney, bro. So
Right.
this is again back to like the joke where, or like joking about your lore and stuff, blah blah blah. Barney and a squad of cultists. Well, he wasn't even Barney. It was a squad of cultists were charging my Death Company, or Death Company were charging them something like that, and he was very purple on the table. So obviously we called him Barney and stuff. And it started off as like this stupid thing, like my Death Company threw a grenade. It hit, but it didn't wound. So it was like, oh, that Barney like jumped on a grenade or sat on it and it blew up. And I don't know, it started off like that.
Yeah, it started
Um,
very humorous. We were laughing at this one cultist that I'd painted like vibrant purple. And yeah, it was just so stupid, right? But like it's going back to what I say, like a lot of fantastic lore starts out as a good meme, right?
Yeah, but
And
that's absolutely where it started.
it's spiraled from there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because then I remember, I was started writing about my death company. Because I love the death company as many as nearly all Blood Angel players should, or would even. And I just like I was like, oh, they did some cool things in that game. They were fighting world eaters, so I didn't really base it too much on what happened in the actual game, just the two chapters against each other. And obviously, I'd be writing it in the Blood Angels' favor, so I was decimating them, even though I'm sure you won the game.
Yeah, I think
Um,
at the start of our custom lore, it was very much like whoever was the author was it's totally one sided. But I think it's quite interesting. I've noticed it for you especially as time has gone on. It's become a lot more of a conflict rather than a one sided massacre,
yeah, because again,
which is
like you kind
interesting.
of learn from that too, because I was kind of a little bit bored being like, oh yeah, we're just steamrolling through everything. This is no issue. We're getting through everything. So it's kind of nice that like you do suffer those defeats in the game because I guess if your chapter is already kind of like there's already like kind of a framework for like your chapter to you've got like ideas for if they win or if they lose. It doesn't matter. And that's the thing when I play games, it doesn't matter if I win or lose because I have an idea of if my lore is going to go. It can go both ways. I have like something set in
Hmm.
stone for
I mean, it's
both
something that
outcomes.
we would even talk about before a game is like, oh, if the outcome of the game is going to be this thing, this is how the story is going to accelerate. And from my own
Yeah.
perspective as well, like it's something that, you know, a lot of people would say that you can't really bring competitive gameplay and homebrew lore together, like they don't gel. And I think I would disagree with that, and I think you probably would
Absolutely,
as
yeah.
well, because a lot of our games I would consider to be competitive in nature, but
Yeah.
they've still been able to accelerate our lore. And when I go to tournaments and stuff, I use that as a vehicle to, you know, create new campaigns
Mm,
in my headcanon for my warband and stuff. And it's a really good way of saying like, hey, the warband went out and they fought against all these different armies over the course of this campaign, maybe in a planet sector or something like that. So I think you can totally work that angle and basically make it so that like the competitive nature of the game can actually be a vehicle to accelerate your lore. And then like you say, you got to take the losses with the wins as well. Your custom
yeah.
lore can always just be, and then they won
Victory after
this.
victory
Yeah,
after victory. It's just like it gets a bit
it gets a bit
boring.
unbelievable, right?
And I feel like the few people, not the few, but like say you have like my friends and my family, they're interested in what I have to write and stuff. And I guess it would be kind of like it sounds silly, but it's like an author. If you can tell where something's going to go, it's like, oh, well, they've already won the last seven battles. I wonder if they're going to win the eighth one. They did. What a surprise.
Yeah,
So it's like kind of nice to keep your, I don't know what word I'm looking for. Is I guess keep like the people who are interested in it and yourself kind of like
keep it honest,
interested
right?
in guessing and
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's just different and just very, it'd be like I was saying, boring if it was all a
I
win,
think
win,
it's a
win.
lot more
But
compelling. And
yeah,
what I've found, I think for both of our sort of my warband and your company is that like a lot of the key events, the key
mm,
accelerations of our various characters and stuff have actually centered around a warband or the company's respective defeats rather than victories. Like
yeah,
it seems
yeah,
like the fundamental changes have occurred because of losses rather than wins, which I think actually, you know, it kind of makes for those like tragic stories that we all really
yeah.
love in Warhammer because, you know, Warhammer isn't really Warhammer if everyone's winning all the time. That's just not
That's
really
it. And
how
if
the setting
everything's happy
works.
out and
Mm.
everyone's having a nice time and stuff. Yeah.
So
I feel like my Knights of Baal seem their lore seems to do better and accelerate when they lose a game rather than when they win it. Yeah.
yeah, I
Because
mean a lot of
like
stuff happens, right?
yeah, like you were saying, my probably like the most crucial
I
moment
was about
in
to say,
my
why don't you give us a little bit of like the a little like you know momentary look at the Knights of Baal, like what like give us an
momentary
example
look.
of like you know like
Um
we'll say like what is the Knights of Baal? Why should we care about it? Why is it different to just
yeah.
the Blood Angels?
So if it's any different. So like when I first started writing the lore, it started off as like with Lavrentius's old lieutenant Castavar, who'd now been promoted to captain since his disappearance. So I started writing from there, and like I was saying, sentences just turns to like just so much. And as well, I always find when writing it, it's a lot better to keep it kind of that looked like a lot, but that's loads of different things in the one note. It's a lot better to keep it shorter and like higher detail and like more immersive rather than kind of over what's I'm looking for, like oversaturating it kind of.
Yeah, yeah. So you
Um,
tend to do a more kind of like we'll say microscopic look at an event rather than like we'll say the top down bigger picture
yeah,
of maybe a campaign or something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I guess I'll read these first two. So bear in mind, like obviously the Black Rage and Warhammer 40K has like, they kind of go insane and stuff, but like in my eyes now, the Death Company Captain Avrentio still has a bit of sanity in him. He's not completely deranged. So where am I? Oh yeah, so this had actually happened. So just like I was saying, I started writing this because of moments that had happened in a game I played against Dara. So I'll start off with before Castivar had a chance to respond, he heard many screeches and jump packs coming towards him from behind. They flew over his head like a pack of mad angels before landing around Lavrentios, circling him and whispering to themselves, Horus, brother, traitor. There were 30 of them. Their fangs were long, eyes glowing with rage, bodies twitching, bloodlust unrivaled. Castivar had never seen Death Company so calm, organized, and terrifying before. It was almost like Lavrentios' presence was having an effect on them. Lavrentios finished studying the blood on his hand and almost looked like he'd broken out of a trance, took notice of the pack of Death Company that had formed around him. They circled him, occasionally snarling and letting out screeches of varying volume. With me, my sons, he said, blood spitting from his rebreather. He pointed his twin-sided chainsword towards the charging World Eaters and let out a screech that put Castivar on his knees. The pack let out screeches and cries of their own, falling further into the black rage and took to the skies with their jump packs, following Lavrentios. So I just like a small snippet like that is
Yeah, that was
I didn't
awesome.
like that. So it was like a single sentence or two that turned into that. Like obviously I'm not going to read everything.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's really
but
cool how it like I would say it's actually quite different from the angle that I go at for writing lore because I tend to do a top down, almost like historical analyst sort of perspective. I'll be
mm,
like, oh, this was the campaign. It's very clinical, and I suppose impersonal. But you have it right from the POV. Like you've got it from
it's
Castivar,
from
right?
yeah
Yeah,
the
which is awesome.
first Captain Castivar. It's his like view, or it's from his point of view in the Blood Angels chapter, and like I guess I don't know if I want to say anything else, but it's basically yeah his point of view and like the how where the chapter is going and like where
Yeah,
it's
the story is being
kind of
told through the eyes of this character. Yeah,
yeah
yeah.
and where its downfall kind of started.
Yeah, yeah. I don't
Um,
think you. Yeah, no spoilers yet because we'll cover a little bit more
yeah,
later
yeah,
in.
yeah.
But I think it's cool. You know, that's a good a great answer to what inspired you to start writing the lore and like the important aspects of creating the lore. But I suppose the thing that a lot of people find difficult, and I think this is especially relevant to obviously the majority of the viewers being World Eater players and stuff, and all the new releases that have just come out. So things like Eightbound that we've never had
Mm,
before, things like Jackals, and more importantly, the return of Angron. It has
mm,
presented a problem for people who enjoy their own custom lore in terms of how do they now fit these aspects in. How do they accelerate their lore? Basically, is the question.
yeah,
Like, for you, what is the easiest way of accelerating your lore, and like, how would you say it's like influenced by new releases or anything like that? It's a couple of
yeah.
questions rolled into one, but yeah, what do you think is the
No,
best way
I
to
understand.
accelerate
Yeah.
lore?
So like what you're saying, it follows new releases. Like eventually, we're gonna get new well, Blood Angels are eventually gonna get their refresh with the Sanguinor, Dante, and all the other characters and the units and stuff. So I'm kind of lucky like they could add a new Blood Angels unit. I've no idea what it could be. So until that happens, but character-wise, like Dante is obviously a really strong, probably our strongest Blood Angels character. Hopefully, I didn't annoy anyone for saying that. But eventually he will get a new model, and when I do go to another tournament, he will be in it just because I love Dante. But for the sake of like accelerating my lore, I'd have Dante do a bit of kit bashing, paint him a bit differently, and then have him be like a newer version of one of my named characters already. So I can still
Yeah,
enjoy
that's
the new
that's something
model
that
and the rules.
you already do it, right? Like, so
Yeah,
from a lot of the games that we play, the name characters in the Blood Angels chapter, you use their rules, but they on the table they are named
a
characters
different
from
proxy.
your company, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
I think that's a really cool way of implementing, we'll say, the characters from your chapter while still being able to use a lot of the cool new stuff. A little bit more difficult with things like Angron, like working it
Yeah,
into your
yeah, of
lore.
course. Like if
Yeah.
for some reason, like if Sanguinius was still in 40k, there'd be no way I'd be able to do that, you know. But when it's like a Space Marine physique and stuff, it's like a lot more believable. And like
Hmm.
eventually, when that Sanguinor, I have plans for the Sanguinor when he gets his new model and where that's
Yeah.
gonna go and stuff. But when that, I'll have to wait for the model to come out before I even start thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, in terms of the acceleration of the lore,
Mm,
like obviously the Blood Angels, the Space Marines and stuff, they've seen a lot of releases recently.
yeah.
Like, how much do those releases influence the changing of your lore? Like, is it? Do you see a new kit and are you like, oh, I have to work that into my lore now because that looks really cool?
Mm.
Or is it kind of like the other way around where you'll write lore and then sort of like, slot that lore into an existing unit? How does that kind of play out?
See, I'm quite lucky at the moment, because for me in my chapter, I'm not very interested in a lot of the new Space Marine kits. Like the new Combat Dreadnought, again, like I was telling you something about my lore before that Dreadnought even came out. So now if I was to, like, great, looks great, the model. If I was to get that model, it would fit perfectly into the lore. So for me, they have to be melee focused. Like I'm not gonna write a lore piece about the Desolators or whatever they're called, or
Yeah,
like
thank
the
God.
Eliminators or something. Do you know, like I'm never going to write a lore piece about them because they don't suit my lore. So I guess it depends on like the models you. I feel like if you're going to write your own lore about a thing, about like your models and stuff, just do it. Do you know, like if I don't know, say like there's a shooty dreadnought on my Blood Angels media list army, make up a reason why he's a shooty dreadnought. You know, he doesn't have to like
He doesn't have to
I don't know.
conform. Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have to conform to it. But for me anyway, it's just not really too interested in the new Primera stuff at the moment. If they, apart from that new Dreadnought, but again, I'm holding out on the for the Blood Angel stuff to accelerate my lore then. So if there's new Sanguinary Guard, new Death Company, and the eventually new Assault Marines and stuff, um, I'll write some interesting pieces about them and like where they came from and like their relic armor or some other thing. I haven't decided yet, but yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, so like I think you make a really good point there that like what you said about like if you want to write lore, don't feel pressured into going into it in a certain angle or whatever. Like the whole universe of 40k, it's a sandbox, right? And it's
Mm,
designed that you can kind of play in it yourself and make up the rules that you want to do. So I think a lot of people feel these like unnecessary constraints about themselves that like if they're
yeah.
playing Blood Angels that they have to have specific units or that they can't include other units. Like if you're playing World Leaders, it's like, well, all my lore has to focus around Berserkers and 8-band and all that kind of stuff. And it's always, or like, they might say, I have to work Angron into my lore somehow. Like,
Yeah.
he has to be leading this warband in some way. And I know a lot of people can be influenced that they love their lore so much that they won't take name characters and stuff. So like for the
Mm,
world leaders, they might not take Khorne. But I think you present a really good option here of like, why don't you make your own sort of model and then use that data sheet? Like it was like probably the most commonly done thing back when Abaddon was really good. When the Chaos Space Marine Codex came out, that there was loads of world leader Terminator lords that were using Abaddon's data sheet and looked really like Abaddon. Like I have
yeah.
my own. The actual leader of my warband is
Yeah.
an Abaddon conversion, as is Jack's one, and Jamie has at least one as well.
Yeah.
So like you should never feel constrained by the borders that the models present to you. I think
No,
like
of course not.
you
No,
should use it
definitely
almost
not.
like as a platform, right? To like
Yeah.
I know the idea you have for the Sanguinor if he comes out as big as his rumors. Like your idea for that is really really unique and cool. But yeah, so like I suppose moving on from the models themselves, when it gets to the actual games, then right,
Mm.
like lore impacting games and kind of vice versa is a big thing. And we talked about how the games that you play can structure the lore for your company and or for your warband. Would you say that like your lore then kind of plays into, we'll say, how you actually play your games?
Yes and no. So when I first started playing Blood Angels, and when I first started like I guess playing like competitively with Blood Angels, it was always kind of like, yeah, it's kill stuff, blah blah blah. But then when it's like obviously playing, I get better at the game because like playing more and just yeah, just more experience in it and stuff. Um, Kind of playing more competitively, and then if a moment comes up in the game, or if I like I'm losing the game or I'm going to lose the game, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, you know what? Lavrentios has been eyeing up that Demon Prince for a while, or another one of my named characters or a unit has been like, there's something really cool they could do. But then at the end of the day as well, I don't really care if I win or lose. But if like a moment comes up where I can't pass it up, say like my Sanguinary Priest Raphael or whatever comes up against Khorne, even though there's like a better charge to make or whatever, I'm kind of there's always like it's 50-50. It's like, how bad do I want to win this game? I don't really care. Go on, yeah.
Yeah.
Raphael into Khorne, even though Sanguinary Priest melee vanilla melee sheet or data sheet is just not good.
Yeah. I
So it
mean,
just yeah, it
like
just
it
depends on the
was
game.
literally a thing for you and me that every single game I would pick Skulls for the Skull Throne and I would make Macrolor do it on Lavrentios and you would pick Blade of Sanguinius and do the opposite.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think it is fair to say that like from playing against you so much that it does come through sometimes. And I think it's pretty awesome to be honest. To like, it's not like you say, you do still play the game, but when the opportunities come up, it does kind of
You have to do it.
you
You
have to
have to
do
do
it.
it.
Yeah, you have
I'm
to
already
do it.
thinking like before I've even like made the charge, whatever, the lore is already accelerating in my head.
Yeah, yeah. I
You know,
mean,
like that interaction.
there has been situations in some of our games where like very very decisive combats have actually fundamentally changed the lore of both of
Yeah,
our respective groups of Marines. Which I think,
yeah.
like looking back on it now, I don't particularly care that I won or lost that game. And if you ask me who won or lost either of those games, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I would just be able to tell you the importance of the lore that sprung out from it. And in a lot of ways, I kind of think that's cooler than winning or losing a game. Would you agree?
No, definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Just like yes, in-game moments and stuff, especially like when it turns out to be really, really important, and then like your named character, like well, like I was saying, your named character faces off against your named character, blah blah blah, and then it like could win you the game, or just yeah, just it's just when it comes down to it, it's just really important for
Hmm.
me anyway.
And like
Um,
as much as it can kind of suck in the actual game if you maybe lose that 1v1 conflict or something,
oh, it's happened so many times.
it has happened, right? But like that's also really cool for the lore too, because you can be like,
Yeah.
oh my god, like they're great downfall or what. Like the a good example that I always give when people kind of say how do you work defeats into it or anything like that is I went on a run a bit of a losing streak at tournaments
Mm,
during middle of ninth edition of my world leaders, and at the time I had been using my Chaos Lord who was Macrolor, who was not the leader of my warband. That was Marikos. Macrolor was kind of his second in command. So I'd been on this losing streak, and my whole angle was like he'd been sent off to the frontier of the sort of Cinderhost's crusade, and he was kind of being told like, hey, you got to burn all these worlds to the ground, and he was losing a lot of the conflicts, and I was like disappointed in myself for losing, but the way I wrote it was that after all these battles and after all these losses, Marikos, the leader of my warband, arrived and he kind of said to Macrolor, hey, you've got one more chance. You got to torch this whole sector coming up, or, you know, you're going to face some serious repercussions. And I went to a tournament, I brought Macrolor, and I did pretty bad. So I accelerated the lore by saying, like, when he came back, Marikos was like, you have to decimate your host. So that means, like, 1 in every 10 Marines has to be killed by their squad brothers. And Macrolor was like, no, no way. I literally been fighting for you for so long, and this is how you're treating me. I am breaking away from the main warband and forming my own one. So even though I was losing games and I was doing kind of poor tournaments, I was using that as a vehicle to accelerate my lore, which I thought is a really fun thing to do, and sort of a meta way of kind of saying how the games that you play can impact the lore that you write. And not that I wasn't playing to lose to accelerate my lore. I definitely wasn't doing that, but I was kind of spinning those losses in a way to, I suppose, make it feel less bad. And
make the loss feel that bit better because you've
yeah,
written this really sick piece about your chapter.
exactly. And at the end of the day, it gave Macrolor a lot of personality. Like we were saying, he wasn't winning every single battle, and he wasn't the greatest fighter that ever lived. It was like, no, he's actually, you know, he's getting beat down pretty hard. And, you know, came up with a couple of like personal reasons for like why that might be happening to him and stuff, and like what's going on and all that. And it really
Mm.
kind of, I think it humanized him as a character. And, you know, then there was this ongoing crusade where he's always fighting against Lavrentios and the Knights of Baal, and that just went off on a whole different tangent, which was
Yeah.
was awesome. But yeah, I suppose to kind of follow on from that, when you're writing an army list for a
Mm.
game, right? How much like does writing the army list is it influenced at all by your custom lore? If that makes sense. Like, are there certain things that you
Um.
will never take or that you will
Oh
always
yeah.
take because of your lore?
I will take as many jump packs as I possibly can in the list. The day Primaris get jump pack infantry, they will be in there instead of the infiltrators. Like the list I brought to my most recent Warhammer tournament at WarpCon was every unit was jump pack except for the three infant squads of infiltrators. Um, so definitely, like I will never. Nothing wrong with it, but it's just I'm not interested in like eliminators or redemptor dreadnoughts. Um, what are they called, the eradicators and like the gladiator tanks and the repose. I've no interest in that. I just love jump packs. I just love that 12-inch movement. And it's just like all Blood Angels players, it's so Blood Angels, just deep striking in, making those 12-inch moves, charges, Death Company, Sanguinary Guard. Um, yeah, so definitely would. My head canon has definitely influenced my lore because I will like I couldn't imagine myself writing a piece about a squad of three eliminators that are battling the Red Thirst, going off to assassinate an Eldar Farseer or something. You know, I would
Yeah,
much
right.
rather write about a squad of say three Blade Guard falling out of an impulsor and like decimating a bunch of Chaos cultists or something. Because in my eyes, that's way more fun.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, but
Yeah.
like everyone has different opinions. If you play a different chapter, say if you play Raven Guard, you'll definitely write a piece about three eliminators going off to assassinate an Eldar Farseer or something. You know,
Yeah.
so I think it just depends on the headcanon you have and like the chapter that it comes from.
So
Um,
like when you were writing lists, we'll say for let's take that WarpCon tournament for example. Like,
mm.
did you feel not like that you had to do it, but did you feel a certain compulsion that like Lavrentios or like the other characters from the chapter had to be in that list? If you get me,
Oh yeah,
or
definitely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Like,
yeah,
cause as well, like Death Company captain with the Relic Blade and Sword of the Imperium Warlord straight. Yeah, he's good and stuff. I don't know if he's necessarily meta. Sanguinary Priest though, just barebone Sanguinary Priest. That's all Raphael was as well. I know you can bring Selfless Healer and stuff. And then I brought my currently nameless chaplain who proxied as Dante. But yeah, I definitely wanted to bring those models to the tournament. There wasn't going to be a chance that I was going to bring Astrath or a chaplain on bike or something. It had to be my custom named characters that I spent hours kit bashing and hours painting.
all right, yeah. You know what? I think we're going to pick up on that point about kit bashing and how that ties into
Mm.
custom lore and all that in part two. But for now, we are going to quickly take 5 minutes, and we'll be back in just a moment for the second half of the show. Stay tuned, folks. Hello and welcome back to All Around the World Leaders. This is part two of the Lore Show with Rory. So, we've had a great first half where we talked about all the reasons that you might want to write custom lore for your chapter, for your warband, kind of the different, we'll say, angles that you can go about doing it, and how you can accelerate the lore, how it can impact your gameplay, how the gameplay can impact your lore, and the wonderful interacting network that ends up being. But one thing that we haven't talked about is the hobby side of things, because there is, of course, that wonderful aspect of the game as well. And I think it's fair to say that anyone who's seen any of my work, which should be everyone by now, you should all be following me on Instagram. A lot of my models are based off of my own Warband's lore and, the kit bashes that I do for that. But Rory, I think it's fair to say that a bunch of your name's characters are also heavily kit bashed. So, like,
Heavily, yeah.
how does that kind of work, right? So when you want to do let's say Lavrentios, right? The iconic
Mm.
deck company captain that leads your
Yeah.
army. Was he a model first? Was he a piece of lore first? How does that work for you? Do you prefer to write a description of the character, or do you prefer to make the model and then write the lore around him? Or do you have a preference at all?
Um, I guess I never really thought about it, so I'll say I don't have a preference just because I can't think of anything to say on it. But he started off as just the Primaris captain, and the only changes I made to him was a helmet swap, and I changed his power sword from the one that comes with it to like the Death Company one that comes in a Death Company kit. But other than that, I just painted him up, and I was like, yeah, I'll name him after my granddad, Lavrentios, and that would be it. And then it was only when I was kind of like, oh, that could be a good. I was probably like maybe, I'm trying to think of how, probably like 6 months after I built and paint him and stuff, I was kind of thinking, looking at his like the base of his torso, I was kind of thinking like, oh, that could be a really cool. Like I could do something with this. So I tore him apart, and then I just started kit bashing him. I put like a jump pack on him. I posed one of his hands to kind of like have the, I think it's his left one, kind of like looking down or looking up at the blood in his hand, kind of like a overly like he's posing really hard for like no reason, but it looks cool on the
It's
model.
a very biblical pose. So for anyone who's
Yeah,
watching the video of this, we'll have a lovely little image of Lavrentius coming up now. But it really is. I think like the depictions of the angels from Renaissance art and stuff. It's very much like one of those kind of poses, in my opinion.
and he's like a fallen angel to some extent. And as well, it's like I didn't want to, before I even thought about making him Death Company, I just didn't want to have like a captain that say nearly everyone else that has Space Marines has, the vanilla Primaris captain. I was like, I want to have my own take on it. So for his I wanted to give him a massive chainsword as well. So all I did was just take two of the Assault Marine Intercessors chainswords, just file them down, stick them together. So it's like the blade goes around the whole way. Put some purity seals on it, and just like I don't know, it's had fun with it. That was the main thing, as in like I didn't really have like a goal in mind. I just started off with like the pose, and then I was like, as in just the torso and the legs, and I was like, okay, the jump packs on it. Which way do I want him looking? And I was kind of like, okay, I want him kind of looking off to the left because the model, in my eyes, kind of opened up to his right. It's kind of fucking with me because it's reversed on the webcam, but it was like reverse or opening up to his right, and just the way his left knee was raised up. So I was like, oh, what about his left hand kind of raised up as well? And then I went about making the chainsword and his arm that was like going to hold that, and it kind of just the pictures will describe it a lot better, or like show you a lot better than I'm describing it. But yeah, I just really wanted to have a captain of my own that no one else has. As far as I'm aware, no one else has this model
Yeah, I've
that, or even
yet to
one
see
that
a
kind of like
copy of it
looks like
anyway.
him.
Hey, maybe
That's
they
it.
will after
Yeah,
this though.
maybe. And then
Maybe.
again, same for my sanguinary priest as well. Um, I bought the Primaris Apothecary and the Sanguinary Priest, and I was just looking at the two kits for a while. I trimmed out all the parts and stuff, and I was kind of push fitting stuff together with blue tack and just kind of like getting an idea of the silhouette I wanted to fill. And I'm sure pictures will pop up now that will show what he looks like. So yeah.
So, like for you, it kind of seems to be like you come up with a cool concept for a model, and then that translates onto the
Mm.
tabletop, and then after that, it's kind of like the lore develops
Then
from
the
there,
lore
right?
starts
Yeah.
coming. Once I have the model and he's built and painted, I see their face and what they do on the tabletop. And like it also depends on like their role in the game as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of Raphael's lore in my head is like obviously supporting his brothers and stuff because that's what he does on a tabletop. But Lavrentios's lore is him just ripping and tearing things to pieces because that's what he does on a tabletop.
That's his vibe. Yeah,
That's
it's
his vibe, all
interesting
right.
because like I just find it so interesting that in many ways, like the fact that we kind of have crossed on so many different aspects of the lore and things like that and the way that we've worked together and stuff, but when it comes to developing models around lore, I actually work in the opposite way where I'll have a lore
Mm,
thing in my head first. Like when I knew Macrolore would be ascending to becoming a demon prince, I had written all that in my head, and then I was like, okay, how am I going to build a model to accurately represent
mm,
that story? And the Juggerlord that I'm painting up on stream at the minute for everyone, I already have the whole story written for him, and I needed to make that model, right? So it's pretty cool how you can have custom lore influence models and models influence custom lore. Like it doesn't have to be a one-way street for any of these things, and I think that's kind of largely the point
mm,
that we're trying to get across, and to just encourage people to branch out and try and mess around with these things. Like make your story your own. Like there's no right or wrong way to do this. Like if you want to have it where your guys were present for every single important battle that ever existed in the history of Warhammer, you can totally do that. That's totally cool. If that's how
yeah.
you get your kicks, that's fine. And like no one can really tell you that you're wrong for doing that. But like I think you and me, we kind of go for the angle of like grounded realism, right? Where it's like this is
Yeah.
actually quite believable. Our guys don't win every single battle. They actually kick the crap out of each other all the time, and there's big ramifications if they lose, and that's
Mm,
really fun too. So like I suppose one thing that like if someone asked you on the street, right, or if
hmm
someone messaged you after this and they said, hey Rory, I want to start writing like custom lore for my whatever army it is,
hmm
how do I go about doing that? What is like the main piece of advice that you would give someone like that?
Just have fun with it. That's the main thing. Absolutely, just have fun. It doesn't matter if like my first lore piece that I wrote probably wasn't great, but I had so much fun doing it. And then the more you do it and the more fun you have with it, the better you get. It's like a painting. I'm sure everyone started some when they first started painting, if they were to compare it to the stuff they do now, the difference would be monumental, do you know? So it's just like that of writing the lore too is yeah, you might think you might kind of doubt yourself like I did at the beginning, but as long as you're having fun and then you get confident, you're like, oh, Dara, I wrote this piece. Do you want to hear it? And like even my dad and my friends and stuff as well, like I'll read it to them and but just have fun. That's the main point I'd make is if you're not gonna have fun, why are you doing it?
100%, yeah. Like it should be for you. You know, like if you're writing custom lore for your own warband, no one's going to care about it more than you are because it's your warband, right? At the end of
Mm.
the day, and not everyone is the next Dan Abnett. Like you're not going to be writing Black Library level publications immediately, and you don't have to because it's a highly personal thing. It's for you at the end of the day, and I think you make a great point that like it should be about having fun. You shouldn't feel pressure to conform to a certain way or be up to a certain expectation. And like we have a fantastic lore channel. I'm briefly going to plug the Discord. If you haven't already joined it, get in there because we have a whole channel in there for custom warband lore and the things that people are coming out with. It's fresh, it's cool, it's really interesting. And there's great discussion happening in there as well. It's one of the many reasons I love the Red Path because people build each other up in that channel as well, and they say, "Hey, we really like your lore. You know, this is really cool. I love this part." Blah blah blah. And even when I'm telling people lore on painting streams and stuff, seeing people engage with that, that's awesome. But while I love the validation of other people enjoying it, at the end of the day, it's my lore, and no one's really going to change my opinion on that, except for maybe you when we play games and you kick the crap out of some of my characters, and I'm forced to change my own lore. But
I'm
that's a
definitely open
separate
to that
thing.
though. Like if something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
happens in the game, I'm gonna do that. But like I'm not gonna listen to someone that's like, oh, that's silly, blah blah blah. It's like,
yeah.
well,
And I
it's
think
mine.
the thing is as well, right? It helps you form a much tighter connection with your army, right?
Yeah.
I think
You
that's like,
feel the losses and you feel the wins
yeah,
way more. And when your character does something like really cool, say if I don't know, they take down a hive tyrant with like in one round of combat, that's like such an amazing feeling because you've got like a archive full of lore and headcanon that you've written for them. Now you've got something
it's
else
not
to add to
just
it.
the Space Marine captain with these relics has taken down.
Yeah.
It's like no, this is Lavrentios. He's taking down like our friend Kean Deadeye is Hive Tyrant or something. It's
Ah,
like
one day.
it's not just another thing that's happened in another game of 40k. It's a heroic deed done by your character in a battle that's playing out in your mind, which and like it can be in a competitive setting, it can be in a fun and fluff setting in your local store. If you have that lore, I don't really think that you can't not feel the connection with your guys on the tabletop. And like you say, feel the losses more because boy does it hurt when when they don't live up to expectations, right?
No, absolutely. And I feel like as well, writing lore based on games instead of like say writing lore about oh Lavrentios went and he killed 1,000 World Eater berserkers and then on his tabletop he kills three and then gets killed by the rest of the squad. Then it's kind of like ah. So that's why I
Yeah.
kind of tend to base it on the games I play rather than going off in like a stupid power level because then it's more in my head it's more believable.
Yeah, I think it's that grounded in realism thing that you and me certainly like, but it doesn't have to be the way it is for everyone. But
No, of course not. Yeah.
yeah, it's really
If
cool.
you're
But I think the thing is, sorry, go on.
No, if your captain wants to go out and kill 1,000 World Eater Berserkers, he can. He absolutely can.
Yeah,
Everyone has
totally.
different preferences and different styles of writing and stuff, do you know?
And it is like we say, it is your lore. Like you decide what you do with it.
Do what you want,
But
yeah.
I do think it helps you form a connection with your army. It helps inform kit bashes, paint schemes. Even like I think it brings a whole level of like personality to the army. The heralds for
Mm,
my warband that I'm painting now, I have spent like almost a month researching different designs for his banner because I'm like I need to convey this exactly correctly, right? Which
yeah,
is like awesome. It helps. I know it helps motivate me. I think it also helps motivate you, right? When it comes to
yeah.
hobbying, when it comes to playing games, like having a reason, not like a reason necessarily, but like it's just an extra trigger, right? To be like, oh, I want to get this thing done because
No,
it's
definitely.
relevant, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And sorry to go back on your point as well about the kit bashing. When I first started doing it, I'd have nothing written for them. I'd just make the model and then do it. But now, like you, um, now I've got like kind of like a solid foundation of my lore and stuff, like with the Sanguinor when he gets that new model and stuff. I haven't like I have to see the model first, but I have an idea of who that's going to be, what their lore is going to be, and then I'm going to kit bash and like do things with that model to fit the lore I have in my head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I've definitely like evolved in that way from like, and you
Absolutely.
can absolutely do that as well.
I think like you saying that there is indicative of the fact that like your custom lore and writing your homebrew stuff has actually helped improve you and upskill as a hobbyist, right?
Mm,
Because you
yeah,
probably wouldn't have tried to do something like that if it wasn't for your custom lore, you know? Like it's like I say, it's motivational. It kind of forces you to take a risk. Like building macro lore, the demon prince, when I was doing that, I wouldn't have gone to that much effort if it was just a demon prince. I was going to
yeah,
that much effort because it was macro lore, the leader of the splinter group of my warband, who I like love so much, you know?
yeah.
Like I'm only making that effort because it's that person. Like Lavrentios, I can remember how many times you broke that model down and rebuilt it, and I was like, please let there just be one
And
Lavrentios.
now there only is one
You went
Lavrentios.
through a lot of iterations, but you only did that because you were like, I need him to be right. And you've done
Yeah,
that with a bunch of characters, like where you've made an iteration of them and it hasn't been like perfect for you. And I feel like those things are only going to happen because of the custom lore. Like if it's just an
yeah.
apothecary, if it's just a captain, if it's just a chaos lord, no one's gonna. You're not as invested. You don't care as much, and you just get it done. But
Yeah, like if it's just a data sheet Chaos Lord or data sheet Death Company Captain, I'm kind of like want a bit more spice and personality to the model.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it helps push you and all that stuff. So I think that's awesome. Like it's just really cool to hear how the creation of lore can further your gameplay experience and further your hobbying and your hobby skills as well.
yeah,
Which is really cool. And like again, just to go back on it to summarize, the most important thing when you're writing that custom lore, it should be for you, for yourself, and you should be having fun with it. Doesn't matter
yeah,
what anyone else says.
yeah.
So I think we are pretty much coming to the end of this episode of All Around the World Eaters. But before we close it out, for anyone who is a lore junkie who wants to hear a
Oh
little
no.
something something, I've asked Rory if it would be okay to share a piece of lore that exists between our two warbands, which hasn't yet been published anywhere, and is a very interesting part of the canon between my warband and his company. So Rory, if you want to give a little bit of context to this lore piece
Yeah.
before you begin, I'll turn the table over to you.
So you'll be able to find like a lot of the stuff that happened before this on my Instagram and like the Instagram captions and stuff. Not all of them, but some of them. I have it labeled part one is the first one, then it'll be like part two, three, or four. Um, so basically, the Knights of Baal have been on the hunt for this like anomaly. Who's Lavrentios? He's like in my head canon, he's very similar to the Sanguinor. He'll like appear in like the Knights of Baal's most desperate moments. Um, and the Death Company that'll be on the battlefield at the time are like they've that bit more strength, power, ferocity. So this happened. The piece I've written now was after a game I played against Dara, and that this was like the final thing we. It was like the final turn, the final point of the probably
Yeah,
turn 4 or 5,
as
where
far as
I
I'm
had to
aware, it
do
was
this.
the first time I had used the ascended macro lore, the Demon Prince as well. I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure it was like the first game and it was like you had to kill him
yeah,
to. So the situation as far as I remember was it was Lavrentios and Raphael, the sanguinary priest, right?
yeah. They were on one side of the board that were the closest two units to Macrolor, and Macrolor had just decimated a squad of Sanguinary Guard. Um, so this is how it happened on the game or on the tabletop, and then I'll read you my piece, and then you'll be able to see like where the inspiration comes from. So anyway, it was my turn. I moved up Lavrentios. He's made his charge anyway. He went into Macrolor like juiced out of his mind. We were in the assault doctrine. Had all the attacks, the extra AP,
The man was
the
living on the bridge of the vengeful spirit in that moment.
absolutely. And he went in and left Macrolor on 1 wound remaining because you did really well on your invulns, I
I
think.
I made it was like I made a
Was
feel
it a
no
CP
pain
reroll or
to
something like that?
I
Yeah,
CP rerolled an invulnerable save and I was still going to die and I made a feel no pain to keep
yeah.
Macrolor alive.
And then Macrolor went and killed Lavrentios. And then, anyway, next turn, my turn came around again. Raphael went in to finish off Macrolor then. So that's all that happened, is in like it was really cool it was having loads of fun and stuff. That's all that happened on the tabletop. Raphael took off the final wound of Macrolor. So this is like the build up to, I guess, that fight.
It's the context, right? Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the context, yeah. So I'll start off where I start. Okay. As the fighting grew more violent and bloodthirsty, the Vox became filled with cries of roar. Hang on, sorry. As the fighting grew more violent and bloodthirsty, the Vox became filled with cries and roars of hate, pain, and bloodlust. Even the strongest of their brothers fell to the thirst, and those that didn't, a craving for dark powers awoke inside them. Raphael saw the power and the rage that the Death Company channeled when they clashed with the Red Butchers of Macrolor, brothers clad in black armor butchering their enemies and discarding their broken weapons before pouncing onto the Terminators, attempting to rip them limb from limb. Still, it wasn't enough. Raphael had to regroup with what remained of his forces and flee. The anomaly that they had come here for didn't matter if his forces were destroyed. A feeling of intense psychic pressure forced itself into Raphael's mind and began to take over. He had to fight it. He turned around, looked up, and saw him, the anomaly that they had come here for. The Black Angel stood atop a ruined building holding the corpse of a World Eater. He threw it towards Raphael and it landed in front of him, a broken mess, and had been drained of all of its blood. Lavrentio stood patiently atop his ruined perch, eyes scanning the battlefield. He saw him, his eyes locked on a traitor's Primarch butchering his sons, and rage filled him. He would do anything for his sons, as they would do anything for him. He let out a cry of anguish and sadness and stepped off of the ruin, igniting his jump pack halfway through his fall, and violently charged Horus. Raphael saw what Lavrentios had seen and flew after him. There was still some distance between them, but he saw the duel that took place, a duel that would decide the fate of the Knights of Baal forever. The screech that filled the Vox and the sight of this fateful duel pushed all of those doing their best to prevent their fall, to fall into the embrace of the Red Thirst. Lavrentios threw himself at Macrolor with the Angel's Fang roaring in his hands, spitting all blood from previous kills onto his face and armor. Macrolor just finished massacring a squad of Sanguinary Guard and couldn't react fast enough to evade Lavrentios' first strike that cut him from shoulder to groin, quickly followed by a piercing blow into his cut that the Black Angel drove upwards deep into his chest. Raphael couldn't believe what he was seeing. This was the first time witnessing his brother, his friend. This was the first time he'd seen his friend lost deep in the clutches of the Black Rage. A single tear rolled down his cheek that he wiped away, smearing his face and white gauntlet with blood. The hulking demon prince dropped his axe and his shield, falling to one knee. This was it, thought Raphael. Finish him, brother, roared Raphael, a slight change in his voice. The two warlords looked as if they were frozen in place, blood splattering onto the ground from the wound that the Angel's Fang had made deep in Macrolor's torso. Lavrentios lifted his finger from the trigger of his weapon and looked up at the figure before him. Brother, why? This was the moment Macrolor needed.
Brother,
he said, grabbing the weapon buried in his torso with his hand.
I am no brother of yours.
He roared and grabbed Lavrentios by his throat with his hand, crushing his windpipe, and threw the Black Angel into the dirt. Macrolor stood again and grabbed the Angel's Fang with both hands and tore it from his body. Blood splattered onto the ground, and he let out a world-shaking roar before unraveling his wings and throwing the relic onto the ground. Lavrentios lay broken on the ground, unmoving. Raphael had to do something, and fast, but he stood frozen. Why? Tears rolled down both of his cheeks this time, and he wiped them away, staining his face and his white gauntlets with more blood. He couldn't move. All he could do was cry these tears of red blood. He started to lose his hearing as Macrolor picked up his axe and began to walk over towards the broken angel.
Brother,
said the demon.
Don't make me laugh. You are no brother of mine, fallen angel.
He stood over Lavrentios with his massive axe in both of his hands and looked over towards Raphael. Raphael couldn't hear what was said to him by Macrolor and saw him raise his axe over his head. He swore the hulking demon before him began to change form and smile at him. A smile he'd never seen before, a smile that angered him, a smile that filled his body with hate and rage. Macrolor buried his axe into the angel that lay broken before him, sending out a psychic shockwave that sent the rest of the angels onto the battlefield into a rage. Horus! Screamed Raphael. His eyes were glowing with rage and red tears ran heavier down his face than ever before. He flew towards the Angel's Fang, discarding his own chainsword and picking up the relic. Horus laughed at Raphael and turned to face him. Your Primarch is no more, he said. He was weak. What makes you think you can defeat me? Traitor! Roared Raphael, charging the Primarch that stood before him. Raphael flew into the chest of Horus, sending the traitor skidding in the dirt. He regained his composure and charged at Raphael, swinging his maul and talon. The sanguinary priest parried and evaded the Primarch's killing strikes and hit back. Horus didn't hold the title of War Master for nothing, but the wounds his beloved Primarch had inflicted before he died were giving Raphael the edge he needed to end this. Sparks flew and blood spilled as their weapons clashed. Raphael had to find an opening if he was to end this. Horus swung his talon towards Raphael and time began to slow down. There it was, the opening he needed. Sorry, I need to compose myself for this bit. "For the great angel!" roared Raphael, swinging Angel's fang at Horus's elbow joint and severing the talon from his right arm. Horus let out a cry of pain and swung his maul towards the angel. Raphael stood to the side as he felt the crackling energy just past his body before cutting deep into the Primarch's wrist. The maul hit the ground and Raphael cut across his chest, knocking the traitor onto his back. He stood over the wounded Horus and held his weapon above him with two hands, blade tip facing down. Raphael had nothing to say. He cried as he buried the blade deep into the Primarch's chest and drove it up towards his head, blood spraying all over the two warriors. Blood burst from Horus's mouth, and as his head fell to one side, it was over. Raphael began to feel lightheaded as his fingers began to loosen around the grip of his weapon. The figure that he'd stood over began to change shape, blood still spraying from the wound Angel's fang had made deep in his chest. He let go of the trigger and the blood stopped spraying. He looked over towards where Lavrentios had fallen and began to feel lightheaded. The black figure that lay on the ground stood up, a broken mess of gore and black armor, and walked towards him. He stood down from the demon prince's body and fell to his knees. He couldn't make out who was walking towards him, but the black armor began to turn golden, and a rich glow began to radiate from the angel. His perfect white wings opened up, further adding to his angelic being. "Father!" cried Raphael. "I thought you were dead!" The great angel walked over towards Raphael and took a knee in front of him, hand outstretched. I don't know if I should do the voice, though, the Sanguinius voice or not. "You've made me more proud than I ever could imagine," said Sanguinius. "Father, began Raphael. "Quiet, my son. You've done a great deed today. Not many could have accomplished what you have. Take my hand. We will leave this battlefield together." A small wound sat on the surface of his father's palm that Raphael didn't notice. He took his father's hand and was pulled to his feet. "Your chalice, please," said Sanguinius. Raphael removed the chalice from his waist and held it out in front of his father. The great angel held his hand over it and allowed some of his blood to fall into it. "Drink, my son." Raphael lifted the chalice to his lips, drank from it, and felt the thirst that he kept back from so long fill his body and mind. Lavrentios let out a cry that lingered between Space Marine and Demon, and his remaining brothers joined him. The Knights of Baal were no more. They had fallen into the abyss that they kept themselves out of for thousands of years. Their eyes were no longer cold and piercing, instead they were filled with rage, and their fangs grew longer. Raphael knelt before Lavrentios, ignoring his wounds. "I'm yours to command, father." Lavrentios smiled upon his rebreather and placed a hand on Raphael's shoulder. The angels of the abyss would make all traitors pay. None would be left standing. All would be purged from the galaxy. It was only a matter of time before the rest of the chapter would be turned by Lavrentios' corrupted blood. How would the other chapters of the Blood Angel take to this, and their allies? Only time would tell. In a galaxy full of war, terror, and heartbreak, for the Blood Angels and the Imperium, this was one of their greatest losses.
That was so cool. I got goosebumps multiple times during that, and I've heard it at least twice before. But yeah,
Thank you.
What a fantastic,
hold the applause.
what a fantastic example of how I'm actually blown away. That was so cool.
That's why I wanted to give the context, right? Before, yeah. So all it was models moving on the table, dice being rolled. That was it. And in my head, I was like, no, it's so much more than this. This is huge. This is massive lore acceleration for the Knights of Baal.
Without context, it might sound a little bit confusing, but for the Knights of Baal, this was a turning point for your entire company,
absolutely.
Right? This is the entire company effectively falling to the Black Rage because Raphael...
I've changed that now. They're more embracing the Red Thirst now because I felt a whole chapter in the Black Rage wouldn't make sense. But that's what I mean. Fair. I had one idea and I went back on it and changed it. So that's why it's always important to go back and make these edits and stuff.
Absolutely. But it's such a fundamental story change for your guys, but it was just a small game state on the battlefield, but now it's going to change everything for the future, right?
Yeah, they're no longer the Knights of Baal, they're now the Angels of the Abyss. So when those new kits come out and stuff, I know exactly what the Death Company are going to look like. I know exactly what the Sanguinary Guard are going to look like. It's gonna. I'm so excited. I just can't wait for it to happen and
Yeah, like
get those
that.
models out.
Hearing that all again got me like super hyped for everything.
Yeah,
But yeah,
and as well, like when the new Sanguinary Priest model comes out, Raphael will no longer look like the pictures that have been appearing on the screen. I'm gonna make some changes to him and make him look a bit more
bit
red
more,
thirsty and
yeah, bit more
more
thirsty.
angry and stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. That was fantastic. I hope
Thank you.
that illustrates to everyone that, with a little bit of time, with a little bit of love and attention, that you can write incredible and emotive pieces like that. Because that piece is freaking awesome. Like, that is one of my favorite things that I've read, that you've come up with, or, in
Thank
general,
you.
40k lore. Obviously, because it's super personal, being macro
Yeah,
lore,
and
the
yeah,
1v1, right?
you know,
But yeah, that was really cool. I think that's a fantastic point to close out the end of this episode of All Around the World Leaders. We've talked an awful lot about the creation of homebrew lore. We've given a nice, tidy little example and loads of context besides. So hopefully everyone has enjoyed this episode. If you have, do let us know in the comments down below. Let us know in Discord. If you're not already in there, please join in and give us some feedback. I thought it would be fun to branch out and do something a little bit less competitive focused, a little bit less kind of world leadery focused, a bit more general, and kind of come in from a top down. So Rory, thank you so much for
thank you
coming on
so
the
much for
show.
having me on. I just want
Is
to
there
shout out my
anything you want
dad.
to
I want to
say
shout out. I want to
before?
shout out my dad, man. That's what I want to do. I know he'll be
Hell yeah.
listening right now. I want to shout out Boomer Derek, and I guess just like my friends and family, my girlfriend as well, just for putting up with kind of my ramblings and stuff. Just being like, oh, listen to what I've written now, blah blah. But yeah. Oh, I'll plug myself again as well. You can find me on Instagram, KnightsofBaal, all one word. And if you have lore pieces that you would like me to read, by all means send them on to me, and I'm sure I will definitely love them, and I'll read them, and I'll give you my feedback on what I loved, and I'm sure I'll love it all.
Hell
But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a goal of mine to get on the Red Path channel. Um,
yeah.
yeah, maybe one day I'll get to play a game on the channel or something like that. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Who knows? It wouldn't
all in the
wouldn't be too
future.
difficult to get that arranged.
No,
But yeah, that was a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for joining us,
thanks for
Rory.
having me on,
And
bro. I really appreciate it.
hey, anytime. And give some love for Rory down in the comments, folks. It would be great. Thank you again so much for watching and putting up with us. Give us a like on YouTube, subscribe, join the Discord, like us on Spotify. If you really love us, there's a Patreon, all the good stuff. You know where to find us. It's in the comments down below. So until the next one, folks, thank you very much for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.